So, first up is Chris Krycho, correct?
Yeah, right.
Chris Krycho, it was it was hard to pull out some introduction stuff for him, but as he's a software engineer, he is a composer, he is a runner, and I believe an all-around nerd, not a geek. Went into the differences there. So a nerd there. So his piece is Fanfare for a New Era of American Spaceflight.
So a couple notes on the piece. You just heard a real orchestra playing it, and that's unusual for a piece that just a random dude wrote. It's actually really, really hard to get orchestra music played. So I'll talk a little about that, but first a little background on the piece. It's called Fanfare for a New Era of American Spaceflight. And I wrote it in May 2020, which if there are other space nerds in the room, you may know what I'm talking about then. If not, I'll give you an explanation. In 2011, the space shuttle flew for the last time. And I, being an inveterate nerd, as established earlier, was very sad because at that point, America stopped flying American rockets into space. From that point forward, every time we sent astronauts to the International Space Station, they went up on Russia's Soyuz rockets, which have been good workhorse rockets for a long time. But, not American rockets, not particularly trustworthy long term. The Soyuz is old. That's what the Soviets were putting people in space on when we were having the space race in the 60s. So in the latter half of the 2000s, SpaceX started really pushing what you can do with private rockets. And NASA signed a contract to put American astronauts in space on American rockets with Boeing and SpaceX. Boeing might someday do that. Unclear. Theoretically, they were supposed to 2 years ago, but the kinds of problems that Boeing's had with its airplanes also have with their spaceships. On the other hand, in May 2020, SpaceX, on the Crew Dragon demo launch, took a Dragon space capsule and stuck it on top of a Falcon 9 and launched it into space with American astronauts on an American rocket for the first time in almost a decade. And I had taken a week off a couple weeks before that. Wanted to compose something. It had been too long. I wanted to kind of knock the dust off and get those juices flowing again. And so I sat down and I started mucking around with ideas on the piano, and I just wrote a note, Fanfare, something space-ish. I actually posted a picture of that to Instagram a week ago. Something space-ish is what it says on it. I was messing with that and working on it, and I had 1 week of being off of work, and at the same time seeing this news from SpaceX come out. So kind of worked it out, got it into my notation software, threw up a very rough mock-up of it from the notation software when the Crew Dragon demo launch happened, and then looked at it and thought, it'd be great to have an orchestra play this, but how do you do that? You can't just walk up to an orchestra and be like, hi, could you play my fanfare? They'll say, you're a crazy person, let's go away now. And so I just kind of left it there for a bit. But I ended up talking with a couple different people over the year or so after that. I have an uncle who's been in the music and adjacent industry. He was with Blue Man Group for a long time and stuff like that. And he said, there are orchestras that you can hire. Okay, that's interesting. And then I was talking with Matthew Clarkson, who's involved in Anselm Society stuff, and he said, I've worked with an orchestra in Nashville. You can just hire them at like 30-minute blocks. And I said, oh no, that's very interesting. And I looked them up, and the particular orchestra in question has 30 instruments, and what you just heard has 90. So it wasn't quite the right scale, but it got me looking and started looking around. And there are a couple orchestras that do what I ended up doing here. This one is the Budapest Scoring Orchestra, and they've done work on Star Wars: The Clone Wars. They recorded with Oliver Davies, who's a very well-known contemporary string composer in England. Really, really great, solid orchestra. And they will hire out blocks where they say, we're going to bring the orchestra in for an 8-hour workday, And you can buy a 30-minute block of that or an hour block of it, and we'll sell you however many chunks of that you want. 30 minutes for up to about 5 minutes of music, unless it's really hard and the piccolo player makes faces at you because you made it a little too difficult. You can also see that on my Instagram.
Sounds like you have experience with that.
Yeah, she's sitting there and she does it, and I had them film it, so there's a video on YouTube of it, which is delightful. But one of the clips is this poor woman, and she does the runs, which you could hear running up and down there, and she just brings the thing down, and she's like, and you're like, this woman doesn't even speak English, but I can tell you what she does. She probably does speak English, but like, it's probably not her first language, but you can see just like, okay, I know, look, it's fine, it's totally doable if you have time to practice, but they're showing up, they're professionals, they're showing up and sight reading it. You get a sight read, in my case it was 5 run-throughs, and then their mixing and mastering team put that together and pulled the video together, and boom, here we are with it. So, kind of end-to-end, learning that, okay, you can spend $2,000-ish to have an orchestra record 2 to 5 minutes worth of music. That's really empowering for a composer of orchestra music. It's really easy to have a piano piece played, comparatively, or a violin piece. Orchestras are, there's a lot of people involved. So, broad strokes, that's kind of the story of how it happened. Is there anything else I should fill in here?
Is it something you think you'll do again?
Maybe. The problem is the other things I'm working on right now are not things you can fit into that kind of recording session. I finished one movement of a large symphonic work, which when it's done will probably be in the 35 to 45 minute range. That'd be a lot of 30-minute blocks of recording material.
What's the little difficulty on the piccolo part?
Not so bad.
Okay,
so
all right. So why? Because you're doing this to yourself.
Yes.
I mean, let's just be honest. This is you're making this choice. What is it about the orchestral pieces that has you, as opposed to just piano or guitar? You know what? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, one way of answering that is to say it's kind of my native tongue. From the time I started composing in earnest, I did an arrangement of A Mighty Fortress Is Our God back in 7th grade. And it was an orchestra arrangement. It's just kind of what I instinctively turned to. Another way of answering it is that when I was 5 or 6 years old and my parents showed me Star Wars, and Luke Skywalker walks out and looks at the 2 suns setting, and the John Williams cue Binary Sunset comes on, and you have the violins doing a very, very high tremolo, and then the French horn comes sweeping in under it, playing what you'll come to know as the Force theme. That was it, I was done. That's orchestra music forever for me. And so I've listened to a lot of John Williams, but a lot of other things. And it's just, that's what I tend to. And I wrote a piece for violin and voice this past winter. I do those kinds of things. But if you give me a choice, there's going to be an orchestra.
So, another way you can do this is, I mean, digital technology has come a long way. I mean, you've got samples, you've got all this. You can do this on your computer.
And I do.
What do you see as the difference? What would make it worth the X number of dollars to hire an orchestra?
As good as samples are, and as good as you can make them sound, and I have some very good samples. I have samples that are the kinds of samples that professional composers who, score a video game and there's not a real live orchestra there a lot of times. It's just the samples. As much as you can humanize those, playing them into a digital audio workstation like Cubase or Logic, as much as you can pull some really interesting things out of those, because they're recordings of people really playing the instruments, and so you do have some of the kind of humanity that's in that. There is nothing quite like the energy and the sound that is real players in a real room, including flubs. So there are 2 things in that piece that none of you could hear. One of them is there's a point when one of the percussion instruments comes in late. I know when that is every time. Nobody else does. But that's the kind of thing that it doesn't happen, right? But it works fine. The piece sounds good with it where it came in. enough so that I've thought about going and moving it in the score because it has an interesting effect, right? That's not a thing that can happen when you're playing sampled instruments in. But the other thing is, humans making art is really important. And you don't, I think, as a composer, some composers really like, so I'm changing what I was starting to say there on purpose. Some composers really enjoy the synthetic dynamics, whether that's a traditional analog synthesizer or whether it's contemporary digital synthesized sounds or whether it's just working with the samples. And you can do some really amazing things with those, with how you can contort and distort samples and things like that. Olafur Arnalds is a really good composer who does work a lot in that vein. But what I like is hearing real live instruments playing real live music. And I think you get something out of that all the DAWs and all the notation software out there have a humanize switch that you can flip in them, because otherwise you end up with this very mechanical, it's always locked perfectly onto the beat. And that's a thing you can use for artistic effect sometimes. But when you go listen to an orchestra and the strings players cut back and forth, they all cut at very fractionally different times, right? And so even though they're playing very precisely and they're very on with each other, there's still a humanity that comes in there that the sample of 12 violins playing at the same time can't capture. And the same thing when the brass, we took the fourth of the 5 cuts of the ending there because the trumpet player's lips were tired apparently, and it went, and it's like, oh, okay. But that was also fun, right? It's like, okay. So it's that dynamic of hearing the humanity, and also there's nothing like that soundstage that they record on. That's fair.
Excellent. Thank you so much for giving us the insight of that. We can give him a little. can you take us through? Do you need water or anything?
No.
Okay. Take us through how you build a routine, because this is so foreign.
Yeah, it really does come down to song. Sometimes there's an emotion or story that you are thinking maybe I'd like to tell, but really it's like when you connect the song, that's where you can take off from. So thank you, both of you, for sharing. Yeah, and then the process is, it's just like maybe like you guys, you listen to it over and over and over, and you find the parts that you connect with. You find, and then you feel it in your body. Like usually after I listen a while, there's some piece, there's some movement that I'm like, oh, that goes here. That's the movement I know. And from there, then you kind of stretch out from that. So I have a library of moves. I will go through that library, and I can do it pretty quickly. Like yes, yes, no, no, yes, yes, and then I get a short list. Then I just practice it. I get in the silks with the music, and then some of them will work, some of them won't, and then it's about how do you put it together to get kind of smooth. And then when you can't find ways to make it smooth, then you have to get creative and make up your own stuff. So.
Yeah. So now, you've got millions of songs at your disposal now, streaming service, all on your phone. What made you want to collaborate with Chris and Jacoby, or just a local composer, local musician?
Well, I mean, our faith group exists to try to create community amongst artists, and like in the discussion of how does art affect faith and how does faith affect art. So knowing that music is essential to my work, I wanted to, one, create community. You know, like surely there are people in here who wrote music, and then also how does my faith and art, how do they go together? So because this was going to be this art and faith group, we're like, we need to find some local people to connect with. And I hope you guys felt a little bit of camaraderie in this idea of, hey, I had an idea, I put my effort forward, now I get to put my effort forward, and the sum of the parts is greater than the separate. So I hope you felt that, because I felt that. So.
And one more question, then we'll bring them up too. Those pieces are very, very, very different. How was that difficult? Because knowing that there's going to be an evening when you're performing both back to back, was that maybe a little schizophrenic?
Well, I would say Chris's it seemed really obvious. Like it was about space, like it's in the title, and I had read your blog, like that Terry had said. So I knew it was about space, and then the pacing of it felt to me like a takeoff. You know, like there's so much that goes until you actually take off, so much that happens, and half the song is up until, you know, before the energy kicks. So I was like, that's what I'm gonna do. And then I thought, should I research astronauts? And I was like, nope. I am going back to 3rd grade, and everything I think about, they use somersaults, they swim in the air, they crash down at the, you know, that's what I'm gonna do. So that one kind of just happened really naturally. Jacoby's, as he talked about, what's the tone? Is there a Gnostic element to it? Is there, you know, that was a lot more trying to figure out what's the tone and how to tell a story. And so for me, it was an attempt to like, okay, you're in this world, but you're aware of other things, and then maybe you get these glimpses more of heaven, and how does that energize your current life by knowing what's just outside the door? Yeah. So that's kind of how I went about that one.
Love it. Thank you so much. Jacoby and Chris, come on up. I am very, very curious, as I've told you before. What was it like to have your song interpreted and used to create another piece of art?
Yeah.
Chris, you've had more time to think about it. You want to go, or I don't care who goes.
I'm fine either way. I was going to let you go first because you went second. So
Still fresh. It was really awesome, and I didn't know much going in, like kind of what you were going to do, so it was like a great surprise to see it, and it's been awesome. I love that. I love that. I don't know.
Was the tone, did you connect with the tone, or was it like my own take? Like, did it feel like something different?
Absolutely. Yeah, especially like I said, like the ending was amazing, and the journey of it was great, and definitely captured kind of how I feel with the song too. So, but it's also good to get other because that's that's one of those songs that could hit people in different ways. So, good job.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you went first, because the last thing you said was something I was thinking about a lot on it. Is, with any piece of music, but maybe especially with instrumental music or sufficiently abstract vocal music, you end up in a spot where there's a lot of interpretive freedom for an interpreter, even when the piece feels relatively obvious. So what you articulated makes a lot of sense. But because it's even programmatic music, unless it's opera, it's not actually, it doesn't have a text, it's not explicitly representational. And so, number one, it's always just really fun when someone interprets it, because then you are presenting a representation of what you're hearing, and you're making it concrete and, representational is maybe the best word, in a way that the sort of text, the lack of text of the piece of music doesn't have. And so when I wrote it, I wasn't thinking, this is Takeoff. But it 100% makes sense when you did that. Like, oh yeah, I know why she did that. And it makes a lot of sense, and it's a lot of fun. And that dynamic, whenever you're bringing the non-verbal, non-textual dynamic of instrumental music to some kind of interpretation, is just super cool, because someone gets to bring their own, what do I hear when I hear this? And then translate that into, that was ridiculous. I kept thinking, like, how did she do that? I would die. I would literally, not as an exaggeration, I would literally fall and die. That's really cool. So, yeah, that dynamic of representation, interpretation, etc. Yeah. And even in your piece, there's a lot of that, because as you said, there's a lot of ways that you could riff off of that same thing.
Yeah, and I remember you now saying something about how you talked to me like in the courtyard about how you were like processing the song, and you said something about like trying to figure out the theme and know how you feel about it in terms of like how to interpret it while you're up in the air. And now I understand like why. So I was curious, like if you were scared dancing to a song called "I Can't Feel at Home" this morning.
I think as a choreographer, I have to tell a story, right? Especially with these. So I have to I had to write a story that fit the song, and maybe that wasn't what you were thinking, but I have to make it concrete somehow. And so with yours, it was the same way. Like I need to, since I have to make something concrete. How concrete are we making this? So I have to make some choices about that. But in order to tell a story,
And just to be extra clear, like what you did was exceedingly fitting, and that's the fun of it. Is even when the composer doesn't have something concrete, in a lot of ways that leaves room for someone to bring that concrete interpretation, and you did. It was super cool.
Are you doing crowd questions?
You sure can.
I'm really curious about the process of your choreography. It's just just an economy of storytelling that was really excellent. So how do you go about honing in on a theme, or deciding?
Well, interesting. Like my choreography, if you compare it to maybe other aerialists, I do put a lot of tangible things that people can understand, and people tend to connect with those more than the big moves. So choosing to do some of those things that draw people into it, so where it may not be so obvious that it's not so easy for you to put yourself in my position. If I give you an opportunity to do that, I think it helps tell the story.
So
I do that afterwards. So after I have my choreography, that's the last part. It's the artistry of it. It's how do I tell the story better? How do I connect with the lyric? With yours, it was connecting with the lyrics at certain points, drawing, making those connections to kind of bring people more into the song.
So I know that what really captured me at a human level are the points where it's you were just kind of resting. I mean, there were some amazing things that you did, but almost like the more still moments are the ones that stick out in my mind. Is that kind of what you're
It's
saying?
true, yeah. I mean, white space in music and anything is super important. But again, that movement, that's an example of just trying to find ways to make it accessible to people in order to tell the story.
Can you give an example from the American Spaceflight piece?
I don't know if it translated well, but like when I climbed to the top and then I get up into a seated position at the very top, I just sat there and I looked around, and my hope was that there's that sense of like watching an astronaut getting into the shuttle, where that moment where he's like, kissing, waving to, his loved ones before getting into the, and then dropping down and flipping over. So things like that. Like I'm hoping those little things like, oh, that's familiar. I know what's happening right now, even though I don't, but I know what's happening right there.
Yeah.
Or the takeoff. I'm hoping that translated like, okay, she's about to do something and there's this building. Okay, I think I understood that it was a takeoff. So,
Yeah.
I have a question.
And like just with like the little things, like at the beginning, each one had a different face, like with the rocket one, or just like this smug, like kind of astronaut look.
Yeah.
I'm the best.
Yeah.
And the other one, you're just like, you're in this world, like, what is this thing?
Yeah.
And then you go out running out the door beaming.
I thought that was a fitting word, fitting. So you're describing forms of art that are very different modalities.
Yep.
But somehow we recognize, that the gesture, the movement you did fit that somehow. Could you say a little bit of is it the emotion that it evokes? Is it the tempo? What is it that? Like, I'm not disagreeing.
No.
Let's flesh that out.
I think it's a mix of, as you said, tempo is part of it. Some of the fast motions that were part of the performance of, is it Jacoby? Did I say it right? Okay, good. I didn't want to say it wrong because everybody says my last name wrong. So. Some of those quick motions, they could have worked okay in the latter part of the fanfare, but they would have seemed unfitting in the beginning part where it's this slow, steady build. I think there's a complementarity to it of this thing is not distracting or pulling away from the other. It's signaling something that's maybe it's not the same, but it's kind of a motion in the same direction. It's complementary to it. It's additive to it. It makes me catch things that I didn't catch in the other, or it brings out something that's novel that maybe isn't there in the other, but that doesn't contradict or run counter to it. And I think fittingness, like if you try to set music for a text, one of the things I like to go to as an example is you really get, if I'm going to break all of your brains right now, I'm sorry, you're going to be ruined for a lot of church music going forward. Every time you sing, in the highest, something is wrong. That's not how it's supposed to go. That should be going up. Right? There's or when you say, the Father. You get the emphasis on the wrong syllable there, guys. It's not fitting to the text. And music can bring out things in a text that you don't hear when you just read the poem. If you do too much, it pulls away and it distracts, and you start getting caught on, the music is doing X. And you lose the words. I think similarly here, where you've got this kind of visual presentation, it's not so much that it needs to be conveying the exact same thing. In fact, it would probably be kind of dull if it were. It's rather that it gets to say something else that's a complement to it, that's suited to what it's doing, that then, again, draws out things that you might not have noticed, or says something that wasn't in the original, but beautifies both as they bounce off of each other. Feel free to elaborate if I think you have.
Yeah, it's an adding to and expanding on the ideas that you had have inspired me and have made me look at it differently too. And I mean, I don't want to steal your ideas, but it's making me think of like, oh wow, like that's a really good idea. Also, like our styles are very different, but there is a common theme of this kind of going, this transcendent going out.
Yeah, there is.
So I think that's kind of cool and
Yeah.
unintentional.
I appreciate that because, like, if you ever look at my library of work, almost all of it, there's an element of wonder in each of like people have different flavors. You know, like you talk about sermons and pastors really only have one sermon kind of thing. Like I think areas really only have one. Story. It's just told in a different way, and mine tends to be this element of wonder. Like there's more than what you see. There's more than what's on the ground. There's more, and I can't show you what's out the window, but I can kind of point to what's out there. And
Right. That's
Thinking about a specific, I was trying to come up with something that would seem unfitting. What you just said got at it. Both of those pieces are very earnest. They're not ironic. They're not sarcastic. They're very just kind of straightforwardly doing what they're doing. And I think there's a place for irony and sarcasm in other kinds of music. But if you did something that was sarcastic seeming or
Overly self-aware.
ironic, really self-aware, etc., it wouldn't be fitting in this case. It needs that earnestness and that, like, now we're going, let's go. Both in the kind of concrete, this world sense of let's go explore this ridiculously cool universe that God has made us, and at the same time, let's also remember that its current version isn't its final version. That both of those are an earnest, hopeful, unself-conscious. Let's go do this thing. It's good.
Which makes a lot of sense because you're in the middle of the sky. Like it should be sort of something that is unself-aware. Like you're drawing us out of ourselves to like, whoa, I can't believe this is happening. So thematically, I think that the music and the art, I think you hit it on the nose, that there is some like that kind of, there's something out there. It's like feeling that.
This is kind of a mini cathedral experience.
I was just thinking I wanted to see you do it in a cathedral.
I would like to. I've tried to get them to hang silks at the church. I mean, mainly because I want a 30-foot ceiling.
Anything else you guys want to say before we finish this up?
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.